You have to understand how to run a business. Right? It's not the same thing that it was over the last 10 years. EBITDA matters, growth matters, margin matters. And with AI now, you can build a really successful business with a really small staff. And if you're driving that through automations, you're driving that through brand, you're driving that through personal brand, and you're looking at those signals, you only need to have a small enough team to execute against the 3 to 5% of customers that are in market today. And then what? The other, let's call it 15 to 20% that are going to be in market in the next quarter.
Welcome to Growth Unlocked, Beyond Scale. Your gateway to the deeper dimensions of business and personal growth. This series goes beyond traditional metrics, exploring the philosophies, mindsets, habits, and life lessons from those who've successfully navigated the landscape of entrepreneurship and leadership. Peer into the minds of those who've mastered the art of business innovation, partnerships, and those that are rewriting the rules of revenue. Tap into their actionable advice and practical playbooks that can be used to unlock growth in your own world.
Welcome back to another episode of Growth Unlocked. I'm your host, Kieran. Today we're joined by Cliff Simon, the Chief Revenue Officer at Carabiner Group and a trailblazer in the RevOps world. From navigating big changes in his career to leading a RevOps as a service company through a pretty impressive and recent acquisition, Cliff's here to share the insights and strategies that have fueled Carabiner's explosive growth and earned him a Modern Sales Leader award from HubSpot. Cliff, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kieran.
Let's do this. So, Cliff, you've mentioned that you've transitioned through a couple of different companies from some pretty large enterprises to smaller startups, ultimately becoming employee number 3 at Carabiner. What was the most pivotal moment that made you realize that you needed to seek out smaller, more impactful roles?
That's a great question. There is, I think, a handful of moments where I felt pigeonholed in being able to have the effect that I knew that I could bring to a company, right? I wanted to be able to change results. And from an IC perspective or like a first line manager, that wasn't something that you always had access to. And the only way to get access to that level of strategic thought process or influence was either to earn your way up the ladder, which takes a long time, or to do what a lot of folks have done over the years, and that's to jump from one place to the next where you have opportunity. And for me, it meant going down the rabbit hole a bit further, right? I started my career off at a 90,000 person company, went down to a 30,000 person company, to a 3,000 person company, to a 300 person company, to a 35 person company. Had these sort of natural progressions. And then at Carabiner being number 3, it worked out. But yeah, it was the roadblocks along the way of getting frustrated, knowing that there was more that could be done, but being sort of told like, no, and maybe part of that was just being young and overly ambitious.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like it's the kind of ambition or I guess the innate drive that you have as an individual that motivated you to want to, well, I guess you saw the opportunity in terms of having that ability to have more impact at a smaller company.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just, if there's a problem, I want to fix it, right? You want to get things done, and the not doing of something that can make it better when it's, at least from my perspective, always felt like that next thing wasn't a huge step. It wasn't going to require a significant amount of change management. It was just the next piece in a logical progression. Why not just do it?
Had you always had an aspiration of sort of having the CRO title? Was that something that you were working towards?
I didn't even know CROs existed when I got into sales. I don't even think the title existed back then. Right, it was like a chief sales officer, chief commercial officer. And no, I don't think I'd even thought that was something to be attained until maybe like 4 years ago.
Got it. Okay. And it sounds like you had some frustrations early in your career around compensation that led to the shift, or I guess a big exodus of sales talent, including yourself. How did that experience shape your perspective on sales culture overall?
I am a firm believer that you have to be radically focused on the customer and the customer experience, and that the way that you incentivize your salespeople should be squarely in line with what you're trying to achieve for your customers. And when those things aren't in line, it creates unnecessary friction. So let's avoid that. I think that's just logical again, but
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make, because I have definitely seen that in a lot of companies that I've been involved in and done some advisory work for as well. Do you do you mind talking through like what do you see as being like best practice or world class when it comes to aligning compensation with driving the right outcomes for customers?
keep it simple, stupid, right? Make it something that's real easy for people to understand. Make sure that your company is thinking about what the customer needs. Like, what is the value and the impact that you are delivering there? And then how does that tie to the company's goals? And then from there, how do you tie the salesperson's compensation and to the company's goals? They're all linked to one another. And if they don't have that through line, there's inevitably going to be a chink in the armor somewhere that causes friction, that makes it so that someone games a system or finds a way to make it work for them, but it doesn't work for everybody else.
Mm.
Be
I've
thoughtful, like be thoughtful and keep it simple.
For sure, yeah, and I've seen that happen in so many companies where there's some kind of loophole or there's something that can be gamed, and salespeople catch onto that stuff pretty quickly, and they kind of manipulate that pretty fast when they realize they can make money and hit their quota out of it. But I think this kind of idea of, I'm not sure if I've ever seen any company do this, but tying compensation and reward to customers seeing the impact that they set out to achieve when they became a customer in the first place, and then longevity of that customer in terms of them renewing, not just once but twice and many times in the future would be really interesting.
Yeah, there's this concept of recurring revenue equals recurring impact, or rather, recurring impact equals recurring revenue, right? And one of my buddies, Rob Levy, actually just put out a 3-year comp model that aligns with a static quota, but a dynamic capability to earn, because salespeople should do better the longer they're at a company, right? You understand the problems better, you understand the customer better, you've gained far more credibility within the space. But we don't see that, right? We see AEs hopping around every 12, 15, 18 months. And that's, also in line with CRO roles, right? I think the average CRO tenure right now is like 16 months. So we're not doing anyone any favors. And we at SBI, we just put out some research um, in Harvard Business Review, the detriment that actually comes to a company when you are swapping out the CRO, and how much that actually hurts your ability to grow top line revenue.
Yeah, I feel like that's a mistake that a lot of companies make is, they look at the P&L or how the business is performing, and it's easy enough to point the finger at the CRO because they're technically, on their role title, they should be responsible for revenue. But that sounds like it's just a recurring theme and an issue, and it's systemic in a lot of different businesses. Any advice you could give to companies like with that in mind?
Take a look at what's actually going on. Is it a lack of product market fit? Did you have product market fit before, but now the market has shifted and the demand is not there, right? Has something else overtaken? Is it macroeconomic that no one can avoid, right? Like the last year and a half has been really interesting for that. Look at the customer behavior. Right? Has the way that your customer is, the way that they buy, has that changed? I'm seeing that a ton with our customers, right? We need to realign go-to-market processes to make sure you're aligning to how your customers want to buy from you today. As 6 Sense puts out some really awesome data. I know it's a bit self-serving of them, but 70% of the buying journey happens before they talk to a salesperson now.
Yeah.
And what they're finding is that 81% of the time, the salesperson isn't the one that's reaching out. It's the buyer that's reaching out first and making contact, right? They're raising their hand.
With that in mind, what advice would you give to GTM leaders to think about how they can re-engineer or shift their strategy to cater for the fact that so much of the buying has already happened, or the buying decision-making process has happened before they start speaking to a sales team?
I think there's a couple different pieces that you really need to like look at there. When we talk about buying behavior, there's a lot going on right now where we're seeing what I've been coining as like the consumerification of the B2B experience. The way that people buy today in the B2B space is mirroring the way that we buy in our consumer lives. So we need to start figuring out how to grab the appropriate data there and be able to put a 360 view around each persona in the buying committee. We need to be able to understand where they're coming from, what the pain is, and then be able to speak to that articulately. We need to be able to show up in places and have really good brand awareness as companies, and not just at the company level, but at the personal level, right? People buy from people. So, how do you enable your account executives and your first line managers and your C suite people to be able to really have those concentric circles of influence within the places that they spend their time? All of that comes together to build a brand and a buying capability so that when the buyer goes out into the market and tries to understand what is a good possible fit for them in their particular problem, you're one of the things that comes up. The other piece of that data in that 6 cent survey was that, yes, they're reaching out, but they're also buying from the first person they talk to 84% of the time. That's crazy. You have to
Mm,
be first.
yeah.
If you ain't first, you're last.
Yeah, I hear you. And it sounds like, well, what I've noticed, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing, is a lot of the consideration is happening behind, let's call it like quote unquote, like closed doors, where you've got these communities, in Slack, in WhatsApp, etc., where people are
Mhm.
going to their peers, asking questions, trying to find information that's unbiased, and looking for those recommendations.
No, 100%. Happens at the bar, happens at dinner, happens on a phone call, right? All these places where we can't even track where the influence is happening, but it is. And again, that's how people buy in the consumer world, right? 54% is word of mouth referral. And we don't have access to like the Instagrams, the TikToks, the Snapchats to grab all of that granular data, right? And follow those trails. So we're going to have to build out that type of infrastructure in the B2B space to do it more effectively.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. On the topic of data, in the past you've described the new breed of the CRO as needing to be highly data driven. In your opinion, how should CROs balance the reliance on data on one side with the human side of leadership?
Leadership's an interesting thing, right? You have to be able to be empathetic. You have to understand what drives people and what intrinsically motivates them. But you have to also remember that you're beholden to the first team. You're beholden to the rest of your C suite as a leader. So my team, while being in my command, I'm responsible for them, but ultimately I'm responsible to my investors. I'm responsible to my board. I'm responsible to my peers. So I think that becomes a very tricky thing. I think the best way to overcome that is with humility and just sheer honesty and visibility into what's going on, right? Be transparent. Let people know.
Mm. Yeah, I think transparency is something that I definitely saw HubSpot doing pretty well. I mean, it's kind of part of their culture code, the T in heart, and I think that transparency is really healthy and productive. I mean, some companies shy away from it because they think there's certain things that they shouldn't be sharing with their employees. But getting back to the topic of leadership, I mean, I felt like when I moved into being a sales leader, it was such a vastly different role to when I was an individual contributor. And I can imagine that continues to happen as you move up the chain to eventually kind of have that C suite in your title. I'd love to get your perspective on that. I mean, because I feel like sales leaders in general probably don't get enough support or just leadership in general when they're making that kind of transition from IC into leadership because it's a massive shift. It's a huge jump. And not everyone's cut out for it. I don't think everyone's suited for those leadership roles either.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I remember when I first had my first leadership role, um, managing a team of 15, didn't get any training, right? I was in my early 20s and like that never happened. nowadays there's so many places that you can go, right? I mean, I think this is, gosh, dating myself a little bit, but that happened back before YouTube was a thing, right? There's all kinds of courses available online. I'm a member of Pavilion. They put out a lot of really good stuff. I've had the opportunity to go through a bunch of leadership training, thanks to HubSpot and a few other places. But that's what really changes and helps you, because you're constantly thinking about everybody else, right? It's a lot less of me, and seeing how you can affect the capability of a greater organization, not just driving your own ambition.
For sure. Yeah, I think leadership is a really selfless role, or at least it should be, acting to help others and in their interest, because if you can help others to achieve their results and their success, I mean, that just rolls up to you as well,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, one thing I always get for the folks on my team is a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
Good one.
Yeah, really love it. I think I read that over a day and a half on a Christmas break a couple years ago. Um, Actually, it was like right as I was joining Carabiner, and I think that really set us up for good success. Like, fantastic principles, right?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. It's a great read for anyone that hasn't. Definitely recommend it. Sort of just continue on that line of like numbers and data-driven decision making. How has that affinity for you influenced your approach to building go-to-market strategies for your clients?
I think it's fundamental. Right? You can't understand where you're trying to go if you know where you're coming from, or rather, if you don't know where you're coming from. You need to be able to chart a course. If I don't know where the benchmarks are today as far as ACV, sales velocity, how we tend to fare in certain industries or verticals or markets, how do I know? How do I know where to coach? How do I know where the problems lie? Is it a marketing problem? Is it a sales problem? Is it a product market fit problem? Do we have a churn issue? Without taking a look at the underlying data points, you're running blind.
Mm,
And it's incredible the amount of companies that don't have that stuff figured out. I always say it's amazing, truly amazing how far you can get with really good product market fit.
yeah. But then at some point in time, that isn't always going to be the case, right? Because that'll get you so far. But unless you're looking and shining light on the right areas, eventually cracks are going to start to show.
Naturally, right? So you need to be able to have the right data ingestion points. You have to have someone that's seasoned enough and understanding enough to look at those data points and come to conclusions based off of them, and then execute strategies to help alleviate those problems within the organization. Whether that means process improvement and coming in and helping from a technology perspective, finding the right people with the right fit for role and responsibility. Um, sometimes the person that got you there is not the right person to take you to the next place of the company, right? Sometimes the partners that got you there aren't the right partners to take you to the next phase. Sometimes the go-to-market motion that got you here isn't the right phase to take you to the next phase. So it constantly needs to be evaluated. But again, you need to be able to have data in order to have that baseline to understand what the next thing is.
For sure. You touched on some metrics before around things like sort of sales velocity, like which industries that you're winning in. When you go into work with a client, do you typically have, say, like a sort of leadership dashboard or something that you would recommend or you would implement for most businesses, or is it more so on a just case by case basis?
I would say it's like 80% the same company to company, right? Regardless, as long as it's B2B, you're and most of our customers are in software, where you're looking for the same things over and over again, right? Um, it's pretty straightforward. We do an executive leadership dashboard. So think of it as all the stuff that you would want on your board deck.
Mm. And can you give me some examples of some of those metrics outside of those ones you mentioned before? I could imagine like net revenue retention is probably a key
Yeah,
component.
NRR, GRR, typically a waterfall or a tornado on revenue month over month, right? What have we grown? What have we lost? Upsell, downsell, churn, um, sales velocity, sales conversion rate from stage to stage to stage for the entire customer lifecycle, right? Billings versus bookings versus revenue recognized, right? Um, Revenue accrual models, things like that.
Do you find that having a dashboard that's built in that way, which is not specifically pointing out particular departments or having someone from a specific department, like more broadly, like RevOps, owning that type of reporting and the strategy around it is helpful in terms of creating alignment between different stakeholders?
Do I think that having someone that's neutral to own that data helps? Yeah, it helps a lot.
Absolutely. Hmm.
You don't want to show up to your board meeting with sales having one set of metrics and marketing have another and CS another, and then you spend the first 20 minutes just arguing over, right, who's going to be doing what, when, how, right? I don't want to spend the first 20 minutes of a meeting arguing over who's right. Let's start talking about the problems that the numbers are showing instead of trying to show, oh, I did my job. That doesn't help.
Definitely not. And so let's say for a GTM leader that might be running a company that doesn't have a dedicated RevOps person or a RevOps team within the organization, what advice would you give them?
Ooh, man. Depends how early they are. I would start thinking about making sure you have the ability to track all of the things that you know are going to be necessary in the future. Case in point, right? Like when we started Carabiner, we knew we wanted to exit within a 5 year window, right? That was the original plan. And when we sat down and talked about that, like, well, who is the most likely buyer? And we said, okay, it's probably going to be private equity or strategic, right? Okay. Um, what KPIs and data points are we going to need to be able to show when that we come to that point? Can we now grab from the very beginning of our first Salesforce? Well, we only had one Salesforce instance, but when we implement Salesforce in the very beginning, how do we make sure we're grabbing all of those data points so that we can show all of that data over time? Because one of the difficulties that most companies run into is that they started something and then their methodology changed. The way that they defined conversion rates changed, and that wasn't documented, right? So they don't have the ability to tell a consistent story across their company lifecycle or across their customer lifecycle. And we put those things into the DNA of the company from the beginning, and it made it so much easier to do all the hard stuff that happens when you go to try to sell.
Mm. What I love about that, and through our conversations over the last couple of years, it seems like you've been laser focused and super aligned at the company, like leadership level, in terms of where you were going with that 5 year goal. And you did it right. You guys achieved that within the 5 years. You made
Three and a
made the
half year when
bets.
I joined, yeah.
Yep. You made the bets, you pulled it off, and you did it within that time frame, which is exceptional. So congratulations. I mean, I'd say that there's a lot of leaders that set these goals, but they end up meandering around, they end up getting pulled in different directions, and they might not end up hitting that goal or even within that timeline. What helped you guys stay so focused and really to hit that goal in such a short period of time?
Like the Elon Musk saying, if you work 80 hours a week, you'll end up where you're in 6 months where your competition will be in a year. I think our ELT was pretty bought into that concept and did that pretty hard for 3+ years. And because of that, we were able to drive a lot. And I mean, in the early days, we spent so much time communicating, and I think that was really pivotal because when things get busy, you're already on the same baseline. You already know, right? And when I say a lot of time, I mean like I think the first 3 months I was at Carabiner, I probably talked to Seamus like 2 to 3 hours a day in addition to working, right? Just ideating, talking through what we were going to do, so that by the time it came to executing, we already knew.
So yeah, just a lot of communication, almost over communication, making sure that you guys are sort of tracking on the same track and moving in the right direction. And then I assume over time, what you did is made sure that as you guys had built that vision, that was consistently communicated to your team and your staff.
We tried to do that, yes. I don't know if we always succeeded with the communication to the staff as far as like we could have, but I think we tried to be as open with it as we could be, or as we felt comfortable being. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you sort of lead the GTM function of Carabiner, and you guys have been growing like crazy. I mean, how have you ensured that the company has scaled without compromising the quality of work that you've delivered for customers?
Yeah. I'll got to give almost all that credit to our team, Colleen, our director of delivery, Zahal, who's been our main recruiter now for, gosh, has she been here like 3 years almost? Um, Amazing job of finding the right candidates, doing culture check. You don't get it right all the time, but I feel like she has like an 85+% hit rate of like people who want to work hard, are willing to prove themselves, and are willing to be helpful to drive their teammates' success. I'm just a front man sometimes, like they're the ones doing all the really hard work. I get to come on here and have fun conversations with people like you while they're out there doing crazy flows and process documentation and dealing with crying babies somewhere.
That's some kind of superpower. I mean, I feel like to be able to have that kind of hit rate and success rate on um, hiring the right people, that's insane. And scaling a
She's
service,
really good, man. She's really good.
that makes me wonder. I mean, like there must be some sort of playbook or some kind of attributes that you're looking for and testing for throughout the recruitment process.
Oh, 100%. Um, Curiosity, willingness to learn, desire to learn, um, ability to take feedback, problem solving, critical thinking skills. And then I don't think we ever actually stopped the process of Seamus doing the final interview. Um, I think that was really important too. We never fully let go of and said, okay, everybody else can handle hiring.
Mm, yeah, yeah, for sure. So he was the final gate and the person that was like, I want to make sure that I'm overseeing who's coming into the company because at the end of the day, it's the people that drive results and interface with customers. So that's probably quite rare, although it does happen in some companies. So yeah, it's really interesting. So with your experience in both larger companies, startups, and sort of everything in between, what do you think are the most significant trends that you see shaping the RevOps landscape today?
I think the biggest one right now is trying to drive efficacy around outbound. It's harder and harder and harder, right? You have to have a far more educated seller. You have to do a ton more research on the industry to know exactly what's going on. And I think that in and of itself, with the advent of AI, specifically generative AI, is shifting and changing faster than it ever did before. And we have all these signals that are out there now, right? So cold outbound, most people I think say, oh, it doesn't work. But there's all these signals that we have access to. And I think the challenge for RevOps is, how do I put that together in a way that is efficient, that is timely, and lets the right people within my organization know when and where they should be reaching out into an account, which persona, with what messaging. How do I make sure that that's hitting? And that's the tough part, because you have to do it within time and place.
Mm. Yeah, that was actually something I was going to touch on next. You brought it up, perfect timing in terms of the AI side of things. I mean, how do you see companies leveraging AI? I mean, everyone knows about it. Everyone thinks that there's potential for it, can unlock a lot of growth and productivity. How have you seen some of the most successful companies, sales teams, etc., leveraging AI?
I mean, I think we're just at the tip of it right now. The demos I'm seeing are out of this world, right? I just got back from San Francisco yesterday. I was at Boxworks, their annual conference, first one they've had since COVID. And the flows and automations that AI is going to be able to enact on the behalf of a human being, I don't think we're very far away from me being in the car, driving to a meeting, and telling my AI assistant that I need this SOW with this proposal, this MSA. I need all of that created. I need that to have it created as part of my template, have all of that be updated within CRM, and then sent out to the customer through a DocuSign or something. I think all of that's going to be automated in a very short order here. Maybe within the next 6 to 12 months. Like, that's wild, right? We're taking away the busy work. So how then does the human being become elevated? It's the critical thinking skills, it's the interpersonal relationships. How do you help them, again, show up in the right place at the right time to the right person?
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point in terms of freeing up the human to focus on things that are more human, right? Being creative and having that ability to build relationships and, thinking outside of the box. And yeah, we're just seeing, even some of the stuff that we're doing for our clients, just the amount of inefficiency that happened within sales teams, even just around, things that happen after a sales meeting, like getting that data into the CRM. Is that data accurate? How do we build proposal off the back of that? Can we give consistent feedback and coaching to the salespeople so they know what they're doing well, reinforcing positive behaviors, giving them constructive feedback? And that's just one use case, right? There's so many different parts of not just the sales team, but the whole go to market that AI can really take that busy work out of to free them up on more meaningful things.
Let people do what people do best.
Yep, 100%. Kind of shifting gears a bit, Cliff, into, I guess, the career side of things. What advice would you give to salespeople or just anyone in general that's looking to or aspires to potentially move into a CRO role in the future?
Get really comfortable with data, get really comfortable with understanding P&L and finance. Go take an accounting course. Like, learn about economics.
That's something that I think most people would have probably never thought of.
Like, if you really want to play the game, you have to understand how to run a business. Right? It's not the same thing that it was over the last 10 years. EBITDA matters, growth matters, margin matters. And with AI now, you can build a really successful business with a really small staff. And if you're driving that through automations, you're driving that through brand, you're driving that through personal brand, and you're looking at those signals, you only need to have a small enough team to actually execute against the 3 to 5% of customers that are in market today. And then what? The other, let's call it 15 to 20% that are going to be in market in the next quarter. So keep that motion going. It doesn't have to grow crazy, crazy, crazy. And if you're able to find really good product market fit and build solutions at scale from an engineering perspective, you don't need the level of engineering that you did before, which means you don't have the cost burden that you had before, which means you don't need to take on capital, which means you can drive it bootstrapped and be interesting about it. And if you can get to 5 or 10 million in revenue bootstrapped, like you've written your own ticket, someone will buy that company from you for 3 to 4x EBITDA, or sorry, 3 to 4x revenue, because they can do the scaling part of it, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think the whole game is completely changed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the need for capital has been massive, and the overheads of running a business have been just exorbitant in terms of the cost of salespeople. And so many businesses have just looked at growth in terms of putting on headcount, bums in seats. And with AI and all the automation that exists today and is going to continue to get better, um, I can see the need for people just being very different. Deploying those into more strategic roles within the business. And I think so many companies are thinking about this, but they just don't know what to do.
Well, and I think there's a desire that's different now than what used to be, right? Generationally speaking, we've got the Gen Zers that are coming up and through. They don't have the same desires that the millennials did. They don't want the boss. They don't want the overhead. They can go out and build a solution that's super niche that services maybe a TAM of 1,000 people, right? But if they can meet the impact need there and drive recurring impact for those people, you can build a small suite of solutions that each do 500K to 2 million in ARR. Like that's a nice little living, some micro tech, like, and then just run it profitably. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, I don't think so. I think the desires of the generations that have come through, you're right, have completely changed. So that's why we're seeing the creator economy and people like solopreneurs, the rate and the volume of that is it's just exploding. So you can see that people are hungry for a change. People don't want to be tied down to a fixed location, don't want to have a boss anymore. So I think you're right on the money
Yeah, I think we'll see more and more and more of that.
for sure. Awesome. Cliff, just conscious of time, I guess wrapping up one last question. Sort of looking back on your career, if you could travel back in time, what's one or two pieces of advice you would give yourself at age 21?
At age 21, oh man, gosh, age 21, that feels like such a long time ago. It was a long time ago. Get up earlier. um, that'd probably be one of them. Don't be late to work. And then number two, learn the economic side faster. I find it incredibly interesting, but I don't think it's something I really started diving into until I was in my late 20s. And I feel like if I'd done that earlier, it would have suited me fairly well.
Great, love it. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all your responses, and digging into some of these topics has been really interesting. If people want to find out more about what you're doing there at Carabiner Group or connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
LinkedIn, fairly straightforward. All the content that we were putting out there gets tagged onto my my personal profile, and then yeah, feel free to shoot me a message. Happy to chat.
Awesome, Cliff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kieran.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Unlocked Beyond Scale. If you enjoyed the show, it would really be appreciated if you can leave a 5-star review wherever you consume your podcasts. And while you're there, why not subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes? If you'd like to learn about how to drive profitable scale in your business, gain clarity on your direction, and improve your business valuation, click the link in the show notes to connect with Kieran.